All right, Josh, we've gone live on YouTube.
Great. Thank you, Brent. And thank you, Josh, for warming up the room for us this morning. Really appreciate it. And Josh, can you help me? Where are we at on participation with our steering group?
A
full house,
Mr. Washington, yes, we are missing Commissioner Hardesty.
Okay. Why don't you do your couple sound checks? And I'm actually going to get started with housekeeping. We have a really full agenda, and I've made a promise to myself to try to start promptly.
Sounds good. I'll just check. Mr. Washington, welcome. If you could do a quick sound check.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, you sound good. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. And we're also missing Sean Dodd. But other than that, we are close.
So Greg, you okay if I go ahead and get started? It's 8 o'clock.
Yeah, we do have a full packed agenda, so why don't we get started and folks can catch up as they come on board.
Okay, I appreciate it. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Deb Noodleman. I'm part of the IBR team. So glad to be here with you today. Hope you're all staying safe and healthy. And as we just said, and I'd like to also note that we have gone live with our YouTube live stream, and I want to welcome our committee members, our executive steering group, as well as our audience today. So I'm going to just start with a couple housekeeping items. And most of you have been in webinar settings, but it's important for us to do these reminders at the front end. So Josh, when you're ready, we'll go ahead with a couple of the first slides. Great, thank you. So we're hoping that this will be helpful for folks, but we do have closed captions in both English and Spanish. So English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window by clicking on the link right here, https://ibr.news/captions. Next slide. And once you click in, you'll see that at the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen. You can click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Next slide. We also just want to remind everybody that since we are in a webinar setting, there are a couple participation tips that we hope will help. First and foremost, we're really grateful to have you with us today. And we're so appreciative people have made time from their busy schedules. These are important topics, and it's important to have you with us. So thank you. Next, please remember to join your audio by either phone or computer, but not both. I always get confused on that one. We encourage panelists to keep your video on. For everybody else, video stays off until it's time to join the conversation. Please remember to keep your audio on mute when not speaking, but also remember to click so that you can speak as needed. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. A couple input instructions for the public. We will have an opportunity for you to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. We do have some pretty tight time frames. There's a lot to cover in this meeting. So I'll give those instructions later, but a gentle reminder is we will do a check. If you happen to be in the YouTube live stream, you have to come over to the Zoom meeting to be able to raise your hand to be able to get your public input accomplished. The other piece is that we do divide the time between the number of people interested in participating. So we'll give you some more instructions later on, but just remember those intro pieces are important. And then if you do want to submit public input after the meeting, you can email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org. Make sure to put ESG Public Comment in the subject line. You can also call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. You can leave a voicemail that will be transcribed and also put into our website information record. Also note that for our ESG members, any comments that are received after the meeting are collected and provided to the group right before the next meeting. So today they have received any comments that have been submitted since the last meeting, and we're always happy to receive those, and they're happy to review and consider your input. Next slide. All right, and so I think we're ready for the welcome, intros, and brief updates from around the region. You want to go to the next slide? And so, Greg, I think we'll take it to you first with the welcome and updates, and then we'll head once around the virtual table from there. You want to take the slide down, Josh? Thanks.
All right, thank you, Deb. Well, it has been a busy number of weeks since we last met. The program has been churning ahead on several different fronts. One of the things that we had hoped to accomplish in late March or April was a meeting with our bi-state legislative committee. And because of session commitments, we have not been able to meet fully as a group. But what we've been doing is I've been meeting one-on-one with the different members of the bi-state ledge group. And we have been having update conversations to make them aware of things that are going on with the program, strategies that we are trying to employ. So it's been not quite the robust conversation we wanted with the bi-state ledge, but it has been very fruitful to hear from folks about their concerns and issues and support moving forward. We know that at the end of this meeting, at the very end of this meeting, we will have two of the co-chairs will be a part of this meeting, Senator Annette Cleveland, as well as Representative Susan McLean will have 15 minutes to talk and also take some questions. It's a very limited time frame, but we wanted to make sure that ESG knows that they are listening and participating. So a couple of other engagement things that are going on. We are meeting with a number of groups with some specialized interests. So one of the groups we have met with was our commuter group, and this commuter group included folks who commute across the bridge by bicycle or walking or rolling, also as well as motor vehicle commuters, and as well as transit commuters that use the bridge. So we had a robust session with those folks. We did a lot of listening and took a lot of notes. And as we move forward into looking at working groups, some of the things that we've done with these individual meetings will be a framework for how we discuss working group issues that come forward. The next major thing, back in our meeting in March, we told you about our open house that we hosted in February. We had over 9,000 individual participants with almost 15,000 questions generated. So we have captured all of those questions. We answered those questions, and we put them in a format on our website at interstate.org, where you can see what the community is thinking about. Folks had an opportunity to talk about a number of different things. And the one thing that we're finding is that the community is reflective of the priorities and the needs that have been lingering for this program. They're concerned about congestion and reliability. They're concerned about earthquake resiliency. They're concerned about safety, as well as the lack of an appropriate active transportation facility to cross the river, proper transit. And so they are very reflective of what we have heard. So as you get an opportunity to visit our website, you can see a number of those comments and questions and answers that we have provided. So with that, Deb, I'm going to flip it back to you, and I'll be coming back for a more in-depth discussion of where we're at on our federal discussions.
Great. Thank you so much, Administrator Johnson. Can we make sure we've let Sean Donahue in? Has he been let in the room? Oh, there he is. Good. Hey, Sean, welcome. Good to see you. So welcome to our executive steering group members. And I'd like to just head once around the virtual table pretty efficiently to give you a chance to say hello, good morning, and if you have any updates to share relevant to the region and the project. Thank you so much. And if I could, Secretary Millar, do you mind going first? And then we'll go to Brendan next. Thank you.
Happy to. Good morning, Roger Millar, Secretary, Washington State Department of Transportation.
Great, welcome. And Brendan?
Hi there, good morning everybody. Brendan Finn, Director of ODOT's Urban Mobility Office. I'm sitting in for Director Strickler, who can't be here this morning. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Okay, great. Next up, City of Portland.
Good morning, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty.
Great, welcome, thank you. City of Vancouver. Oh, you're on mute, Mayor McInerney-Ogle.
Good morning, Ann McInerney-Ogle, Mayor for the City of Vancouver.
Thank you and welcome. Next up, RTC, then Metro.
Hi, Scott Hughes, Chair of the RTC. Thank you.
Morning, President Lynn Peterson of the Metro Council.
Great, welcome to you both. Next up, CTRAN, then TriMet.
John Donaghy with CTRAN.
Good morning, Steve Witter from TriMet.
Great, and then Port of Portland and Port of Vancouver.
Good morning, Kristen Leonard with the Port of Portland.
Good morning, everyone. Juliana Marler, CEO with the Port of Vancouver.
Great, and then to our CAG co-chairs. Lynn?
Top of the morning, Lynn Ballantyre, CAG co-chair.
Yes, Ed Washington, Oregon co-chair.
All right, I think I've covered everybody. And so welcome to all of you. And so glad to have you with us. And we also have a number of folks here that you don't see their screens on right now, but they're off the IBR team and are going to be presenting today. So welcome to all of you also. And they'll introduce themselves as they cover their sections. Why don't we quickly, Josh, I'll just do the agenda and then I think we'll be able to jump in. So we always manage to fill your agenda to the brim. So in our 2-hour meeting today, as always, we do have a lot to cover. So as soon as I'm done with this introductory piece, and I have just a tiny bit more housekeeping to cover, we'll jump right in. The first topic is really packed. And the way we structure things today is that our goal is that within that first half hour to share with you, I often call this the where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going related to program activities. And really, we hope give you a lay of the landscape around both information related to the recent federal guidance, as well as the proposed approach moving forward. I'm going to gently ask that we hold all questions. If people could write down your questions and hold them till after that half hour, we'll be opening up the rest of the meeting for your question answer with each other, with the team, discussion, and working through those next steps. So that'll take about the first half hour. And then as we get into that 8:45 to 9:25 section, we really want to open it up for you as ESG members, talking to each other, talking with Administrator Johnson, engaging around this topic of where are we at in the program and what does it mean to prepare for both the May 20th ESG meeting, as well as a recommendation to the Bi-State Legislative Committee. So lots to talk about there. And the goal is that by the time we finish that section, there's some clarity, again, on the status of where the program's at, and most importantly, the pathway forward from here. We will then take brief opportunity for public input. We have a 10-minute window, as I previously mentioned. And then, as Greg said, we'll then after that have about 15 minutes to hear a report out on recent legislative discussions regarding the program itself. So a little bit of a flip in the timing there so that we can make space for our legislators to join us. I'll briefly wrap up with upcoming meeting topics, next steps, and summary, and we'll adjourn no later than 10 o'clock. Anybody questions on the agenda? Feel free to jump in if you do. Okay, as always, we sent materials in advance. We also post for our public all the materials to the website. Please feel free, everybody, to always check the website. There's a wealth of great information, interstatebridge.org, and please don't hesitate. So the ground rules are pretty common, and just a gentle reminder about honoring this agenda. We have a lot to cover, listening to each other carefully to both understand, ask questions to clarify, thinking, why am I curious to understand where there may be difference of opinion, and to spend time both understanding the diversity and the difference for a richer dialogue. Focus on the substance of the content, soft on people and their style, seeking common ground wherever possible, and balancing speaking time. Thank you. Next slide. And so I just want to check just one other piece is that I want to see if I have anything else to mention. Oh, I know. I always like to mention that these slides will be available so that the audience knows immediately after the meeting. We always post them to the website, as well as any of the other materials that you'll be seeing shared today. So I think with this, Greg, I think we're ready to jump into our first topic. All right.
Excellent. Thank you, Deb. Once again, Greg Johnson, Program Administrator. So I don't know how many of you are fans of the Olympic, and have you ever watched the kayaking event where they're going down this whitewater course and have to maneuver around and do hairpin turns? That's what it feels like the last couple of months regarding how we are trying to maneuver through our federal NEPA process. So we have been in a 2.5 month long discussion with our federal partners on how we can close the environmental process for the IBR, how we can successfully do it and meet all of their criteria and meet the goals of the community, as well as the goals of our advisory groups for us in this endeavor. So the conversations have been changing. We have submitted language to our federal partners that included equity and climate in the purpose and need. And we've heard back verbally. We have not heard back in writing with written guidance. So you're going to hear more about those in-depth discussions from Chris Regan on our environmental team. But the things that we are hearing is that since we had already had a record of decision for this program, that record of decision is still standing and still valid. What that means is we have to honor that federal commitment. What it doesn't mean is that we cannot change things. We know that in the 10 years since that record of decision, there are numerous things that have changed that will change design options and change how we complete this program. So I'll give you an example of some of the change. So back 10 years ago, CTRAN did not have a viable BRT system in place. Now CTRAN has a robust, mature BRT system in place in Vancouver. So that's a change that we have to recognize and see what that means for our options.
Excuse me, Greg, what is a BRT?
BRT is bus rapid transit.
Yeah, I suspect many of our audience won't know the term if you're using acronyms, so thank you.
And I apologize, as we engineers love to do that, so thank you, great catch. So the bus rapid transit system is a change in Vancouver that we have to take into account. Another is the Port of Portland has informed us and informed everybody that they no longer have plans to develop facilities on the west end of Hayden Island. So we are looking at what that means for access to Hayden Island, what kind of traffic loads will now be accessing and egressing from the island, and what that means. So we're going to have some in-depth discussions with the Hayden Island folks to make sure we understand all of the concerns. So we'll be talking to owners of floating homes, we'll be talking to businesses, to developers, and just regular residents of Hayden Island to understand what their concerns are for the present and the future. So some of the things that we've been hearing from our mandate from the governors as well as the bi-state is to maximize our past investment. And the CRC previous planning study generated a lot of information, and we understand there are concerns about some of the outcomes of CRC, but they gathered a lot of data, a lot of information, did a lot of analysis. So we're going to continue to use that information. We're updating data. We're going to update inputs to transit models as well as traffic models to give us data and help drive decisions. We're also supporting efficient decision making. We are trying to drive this in coordination with some of the funding discussions that are going on, not only here locally, but nationally, so we can position ourselves to possibly be recipients of dedicated funds to help us build this bridge. So once again, we are meeting with individual partners in the transportation arena to make sure we are understanding the changes that they have seen in the last 10 years. So we are gathering and putting those changes and the impacts into a matrix so we can understand which changes are impact other things and which are interlinked and which are standalone changes. So for instance, one of the changes in the DOT world is the North Portland Harbor Bridge. That's the bridge that connects the south side of Hayden Island to North Portland. So way back when this study was originally done, that bridge was fairly young or in the middle of its lifespan. Now it is almost 20 years later, and back then the plan was to seismically retrofit that bridge. But now the question is do you invest that much to seismically retrofit, or do you replace the bridge and restart a new life cycle consistent with the other bridges that we have to build? So that's just a inkling of some of the changes that have been identified. So we've talked to our stakeholder groups. We've asked them the very same questions, the CAG and the EAG, about what has changed and what things they find important. And we have heard consistently that the focus on equity, the focus on climate are things that the community and our partners value. So we are committed to embedding equity and climate into our program. And what you see to the right, these graphics represent some of the framework, just a graphic showing the outlines of equity and climate frameworks that we are working on. And these are going to be eventually incorporated into the NEPA document with commitment and with surety that they will be done. We will be as granular to identify funding sources for all of the things that we identified regarding equity and climate. So once again, working with our advisory groups and input we receive from our partners in the community is going to make these living documents until the final ink is dried on the NEPA document and we receive a new record of decision. So with that, let's go to the next slide. We have in our conversations with our federal partners, they have laid out 4 pathways for us to proceed in the environmental process, to complete the NEPA process, and to also move forward with getting a new record of decision. So if you can see to the left, and I'm going to have Chris Regan is going to explain things in more detail. So I'm going to give you the 10,000-foot view of this. So all pathways on this process start with a reevaluation. That is the necessary thing that our federal partners have to do, is reevaluate what changes have happened and what changes we propose. And so they will look at it and say, okay, these changes are not significant enough to the basics of the record of decision that was achieved that will make a great difference. So they could stick to the far left column as a reevaluation of the entire program and look at it and say, yes, you've answered these questions, and we will give you an amended record of decision. So the middle box, the middle blue box is, recognizing that there are some significant changes that have occurred. And the first, or I should call it the second pathway, involves doing a reevaluation of, I shouldn't say reevaluation because the reevaluation will start it, and then you will be looking at going into a limited scope supplemental. And that limited scope supplemental will look at things that have changed, but these changes are not impactful to one another. Some of them may have absolutely zero impact on other things that we're doing. And so that path is the limited scope environmental impact statement. The third path is there are so many changes, and these changes interact with each other, they impact each other, and it creates an overall change in how this project is to move forward. And that would be a full supplemental environmental impact statement. So that includes creating public comment and having a draft EIS and then a final EIS, and then resulting in an amended record of decision that reflects these changes. But the basics of the program are still the same. You're still crossing the river, and you're still providing high capacity transit in some form or another. And you're taking care of all of the purpose and need issues, but just in a slightly different way. So the fourth path is that if all of our partners, the community, and everyone agrees that, boy, we need to radically change what we are doing here. And that fourth path speaks to the changes are so foundational and so fundamental that it throws us into a new project. And by new project, that means starting the process over, which means going back to every option that had been looked at and reopening the doors for those options. Now, we know that some of those options will be put to bed fairly easily, but the process of getting there is going to be a lengthier process that could add up to 2 to 3 years, which is our best estimate of closing path 4. These other paths, the first path is something that pretty much reflects a schedule or even a quicker set of results from our existing schedule that we've been talking to you about. The limited scope supplemental also is a relatively quick process that we could get through and still achieve construction in breaking ground in 2025. The third path, a little bit longer, but by the end of 2025, we still could be in construction, breaking ground, and moving forward. And once again, the fourth path may push out construction beyond into 2027, 2028. So these are the paths that have been described for us and that we understand are potentially open to us. There's nuances to this that we cannot show in a graphic that our environmental team has been having a conversation with our federal partners. And by our federal partners, I mean our federal transit and federal highway administrations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Regan, who has a great and much more thorough understanding of all of these things. So he can dive in and talk more specifics and give you guys a better idea of the conversation, since he has been involved in those things firsthand. So Chris.
Okay, thanks Administrator Johnson. Good morning, everybody. Chris Regan, Environmental Manager, and as Greg said earlier, kayak enthusiast here. So I think, Greg, you did a great job covering a lot of the details here. There's just a couple things that I wanted to touch on. This is a pivot for us, and this pivot is how do we ensure that we're looking at the right things as we define changes within the program area. As Greg said, all paths lead through a reevaluation, and the reevaluation is going to focus on a number of things, including past NEPA footprint, new adverse impact, but then also what is the specific justification that we need to change to address issues that have changed within the program area. And so we're working with our transportation partners, we're getting to that. Those four paths have been discussed with the Bi-State Legislative Committee. We're having discussion because it's a pivot, because it's so important. We're making sure that everybody understands that. And as Greg was talking about, that fourth path, we've also had some discussion of the possibility of infusing climate and equity as part of a purpose and need. And there's no guarantees with that. The conversation from the federal partners is really around focusing on how do we move forward? How do we ensure that we focus on transportation needs? They're working on new guidance, but they don't have that new guidance. And so it's a little bit of a difficult maneuver for us right now. Next slide, please. So then what we're doing is looking at evaluating our prior planning. We have a purpose and need, we have vision and values. We've got an incredible amount of information that was captured in the planning process that took place from 2005, 2011. The commitments, the constraints, the negotiations that took place helped lead us to where we are today. But things have changed. And so we're reaching out, getting feedback and recommendations from you, from our community advisory group, equity advisory group, and just general community engagement. Focusing on what has changed, including community values, looking at updated data and analysis, planning and regulatory updates. From there, we're establishing program commitments. Very important to focus on those commitments for equity and climate. Looking at community priorities. We're going to use those in our conversations with our transportation partners to identify design options. We'll develop performance measures, screening criteria. That is going to help set that set of screening design options that will define the IBR program. When we have the IBR program defined, after we address those changes, we will bring that to our federal leads and ask them to help reevaluate the changes that have occurred with the IBR program and the specific impacts associated with those changes. When we know that, we will know our NEPA path forward. And that NEPA path forward will focus a little bit more, again, on those four options, but it's also going to focus a lot on design. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Frank to go through our design process.
Thank you, Chris. And can you hear me? I hope so. So yeah, I'll walk through our design process here and give a little bit of an overview. One of the things I know that we've been asked is, when are certain things going to be addressed? When are we going to be looking at some of these important design options that the partners and the community want us to be addressing? And so as we transition into this next stage,
Hey, Frank, if you could identify yourself and your role for the audience.
Thanks.
Thank
I was
you.
just
Thank you,
thinking
Greg.
that. Yep. Go ahead,
So-
Frank.
Yeah, Frank Green, Assistant Program Administrator. I think I've met all of you and presented a few times, but yeah, so sorry, diving right back into it. Clearly one of the processes we're going to move forward with right now is really working with each partner, working with the community, working with our advisory groups to begin the process of identifying design options that we will kind of do a deep dive looking into, laying out what those design options would look like, beginning to model, to do some modeling and gathering the data that those design options would have to show the benefits, and really to identify and to start understanding how we can get to a decision-making process on where there's identified changes, how we determine to select which design options to move forward. And so you'll hear a little bit later from John L. about our equity advisory group. You'll also hear from Sarah, who is our equity officer, about the equity and the climate screening criteria. But while we're developing these design options, we're also going to be refining the criteria that we will measure those design options to. And so you see the first two line items on this target schedule show that, for the next several months, we're going to be working with this group, with our staff group from our partners, with those advisory groups, and with the public, to identify our design options and refine that screening criteria. After we're able to develop some of the initial design options, we're going to be continually identifying the data and the modeling that we need to help feed into that screening criteria, to eventually get to a point where we can identify the design options that we will do that reevaluation against. As you recall from 2 slides earlier, kind of all paths lead through a reevaluation as the first kind of primary step to determine which path we're on, whether it's, just a reeval if there aren't the significant impacts, or supplemental or something different. So throughout this, we're going to be having targeted community engagement. We're going to be using our advisory groups to provide a lot of input and to really help us kind of mold what the screening criteria would be. And then once we have a good list of design options, we'll be kind of getting into the screening of those. So next slide, please. So to kind of lay the groundwork and discuss how we've began this process, the first thing we did is we had very direct one-on-one conversations between the program team and each one of the staff from the partners to really develop that first brainstormed list of getting into all of the relevant changes. As Greg had mentioned before, he mentioned a few of them, to figure out from previous planning efforts, what are some of the changes that have occurred. Those changes could be in one of several categories. They could be physical changes. So for instance, there could be a development or a property that's been developed that previously hadn't been developed, and so now that's potentially an impact by a program. There can be contextual changes. Those can be anything from policy decisions or just things that have been newly implemented, such as Greg had alluded to, the Vine in Clark County with the bus rapid transit system. There can also be things that can be raised, like from public controversy. So discussions such as, from previous planning efforts, we know a lot of discussion went around, are tolls a viable or potential way to fund a program. And so we began to catalog at least the initial brainstorm list from all of our partners. We're in the process of trying to consolidate that list. But we know Greg has already touched upon a few of them. We know some of the key changes that will prompt a lot of discussion about what design options are we going to investigate are things like exactly what was mentioned with the Vine and the Max, and how do we combine or merge those two transit systems into a system that can cross the river here. And so the next part of this process is for us to take that list and to determine the process in which we can start putting designs and some information and beginning to collect that data so that we can really have a data informed process for decision making. And one of the key things that I think, once again, Greg already touched upon, but we know that the efficient decision making process that we're looking at trying to reutilize as much information as we can from the previous effort will really hopefully help set us up for and set the region up for competition with any potential federal infrastructure funds. So with that, I think I'm turning it over to Sarah to cover some climate framework.
Great. Thank you, Frank. And hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name's Sarah Auger, and I'm the program's climate officer. I have the opportunity today to I'm excited to share with you an overview of our climate framework. I want you to think about climate in two core ways, and that's how we'll be approaching this is climate resilience and climate impacts. And we have three petals on this icon that talk about climate impacts. We'll be looking at minimizing climate impacts and looking for design choices that foster and increase climate-friendly transportation options. So that's our transportation options component. And then we'll also be looking at construction and how we can minimize climate impacts through our construction methods, means, and materials. And lastly, we'll be looking at operations of all the infrastructure we're designing and looking for opportunities that we can design and implement this program in a way that our future operations and maintenance are as low impact as possible. And then the climate resilience component is making sure that we design all these elements, the bridge, the freeways, the elements of those interchanges with climate variability in mind. And so that's the core construct. I'm really looking forward to continuing a discussion with you and your agency staff on your climate priorities and how they can nest into this framework and we can advance them through our process. So that's kind of our core framework. I don't know, Greg, if you have anything else you want to add, I think we can move to the next slide.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. So I think it's here back to you, Greg, for next steps in moving forward.
So our next steps, once again, is to continue to work with our agency partners as well as our advisory groups to talk about the changes and talk about design options and create a program, a project that everyone sees themselves in, and continue the conversation with our federal partners. We realize that we have a narrow path that we can navigate with our federal partners, so we're still waiting on written guidance on how we navigate it. But having screening criteria, and like I said, it sounds technical and it sounds engineering speak, but these are the things that you're going to want to move forward. When it comes to equity, we've heard that if we're going to toll, we've got to do it in a way that's equitable for folks of low income. So we'll be talking about what that means in the real world, what that means for folks who are low income, and how do we recognize that and make sure that they can utilize this bridge as well as anyone else. When we talk about environmental screening criteria, we also are looking at some of the practical solutions that are out there that are being done across the country, that are being done across the world to make this this bridge and the associated roadway operate in a green way that reduces greenhouse gases. So all of these things we're looking at, we're gathering community values and priorities to inform us of how we move forward. So once again, we're identifying the most effective ways to formalize these commitments. And I've talked to a number of you about whether it's green sheet commitments at the end of the NEPA process that documents every commitment and how that commitment will be paid for. And different than what you may be hearing from some of our detractors, if it is in the NEPA document, it is a commitment. It is not something that either of the DOTs can walk away from and say, well, we're choosing not to do that. So if it doesn't appear in purpose and need, but it appears in a different chapter, it is still a commitment. So those are things that we're looking at of how we formalize it. Some folks have mentioned that they would like to see letters of concurrence, memorandums of understanding, possible intergovernmental agreements to put these things and put them, shine a spotlight on them and make sure they are achieved. So those are things that we're thinking about of how we get to those commitments and make all of our partners feel comfortable and make the community feel comfortable with how we are progressing and addressing the commitments. So next slide. So I think this is a turnover to John L.
Actually, I think we're going to start with our CAG co-chairs first. So Community Advisory Group, no worries, we've got both, right? So Community Advisory Group co-chairs, if you want to report out. Thank you.
All right, I'll start, and then my co-chair has agreed to supplement anything I move too quickly or overlook. So our last meeting ended yesterday evening, and so this is just in time reporting. We heard some of the same information regarding the update and guidance from federal partners, path forward, and environmental documentation that this group here just heard. We requested and received full consensus on our CAG charter, which is how we will be operating, and that was an important kind of first step toward achieving consensus. We also had a discussion on the community values and priorities document. There was broad agreement that the document was excellent, but we went into breakout groups, and many of the groups were seeking stronger language in some elements. So it was agreed that the program staff would come back and make those revisions, and then it would be presented for complete consensus. Next slide, please. This has been one of the most valuable parts, and I want to give a shout out to program staff who have been very creative in how we get input in providing individual, collective, small breakout, broad community. It's just been really a full environment of gaining community input. I would also just thank this group for really being invested in what the community cares about. And if you recall, the last time we did a briefing, we showed very high alignment with what the community advisory group's priorities were as to the general public who had participated in a very broad outreach over a significant amount of time. So consistent with that, the individual input has shown a strong desire to move faster, and we want individually and collectively want to get into the details of a solution. We appreciate the historical context, the information, and the setting of the foundation so that we had the proper tools to be able to provide meaningful input. We like our breakouts. We figured out how to work it. They use the Jamboard. The staff goes back in and embeds it with the collective wisdom and direction, and that's worked out well. Now that we've moved to monthly meetings from every 2 weeks, it may be that because the project is moving quickly and members want to stay engaged, it may be that a communication piece in between meetings would be useful. We appreciate the individual check-in meetings, and we're just seeking to understand where and how can our voice influence the program. So we will be, at our next meeting, we'll be discussing and addressing the changes since the previous program that we feel should be considered and reflected in a bridge replacement solution, as well as finalizing the community values document and hearing about other information. So with that, I would defer to my co-chair to ask if there's anything he would like to add or provide insight on.
Thank you very much, Lynn. No, to everybody, I don't think there's anything I need to add. Lynn did a wonderful job, an excellent job of conveying the information from our last meeting. So I'll probably do something the next time. Thanks very much, Lynn.
Thank you both so much for your commitment and hard work here.
Hey, Deb, there was an important update that I have forgotten to give, that if you can entertain this interruption for a brief minute.
Of course.
So we have begun the tribal consultation process, and we have met with 4 of the federally recognized tribes at this point, with some very great conversations and also understanding their concerns, understanding what has changed for them over these last 10 years since the record of decision. So that's a very important step. Carolyn Holtoff, who is our IBR team tribal liaison, has been walking us through the process and helping us with those communications. But it has been very robust discussions and some very fantastic ideas coming out of the tribes.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Administrator Johnson. And on to Chief Equity Officer Janelle Bell. Welcome.
Thank you, Deb, and good morning, Executive Steering Group. Just to provide a quick update on what the EAG as well as your equity team has been up to on April 19th. We did have a meeting where we received an update from Administrator Johnson as well as our environmental team relative to the 4 pathways that we also heard this morning. Had a real good, robust discussion about that and really what it means in terms of operationalizing equity moving forward. The committee also approved a recommended program specific definition of equity. I'll talk about that in a second, but you'll recall for the past several months, the committee has really been working on developing and refining a program specific equity definition in terms of what does equity mean within this context. We discuss potential equity focused screening criteria, performance measures, which, as I'll talk about in a second, is really part of our overall equity framework, which is a word we've been using a fair amount. I'll talk a little bit about what does that mean in this context. Our next meeting is Monday, May 17th, 5:30 to 7:30. And just a reminder to all of our members of the public, as well as all of you, all of these meetings are open to the public. We also encourage receipt of public comment. And so I just want to put that note. Next slide, please. And looking at the work plan until really about August, September, a lot of what the Equity Advisory Group will be focused on is really developing key performance indicators as well as some of the structure concerning our equity framework. That starts with the definition. Until we actually know how we're defining equity, we really can't develop any measures around it or understand if we've actually accomplished our goals concerning it. Equity objectives, develop and recommend performance measures and screening criteria. The screening criteria are going to be critical as we look at design options, ensuring that design options are actually living up to our various equity goals. And then, of course, to provide design recommendations and feedback based on definition and objectives. Next slide. Just a slide to think about kind of the equity framework. There are a couple of elements of the equity framework. There's the program equity definition, and this is really thinking about what does equity mean in the context of IBR. Prior to kicking off this exercise, we had an opportunity of looking at all of your definitions of equity. And one thing that has been pretty remarkable in this region is the evolution of the way in which this region really thinks about equity, racial equity in various contexts. And so we wanted to not presume that we were going to start from scratch. We wanted to build upon the good work that has occurred in this region. The next piece of the framework is equity objectives, and this really gets down to what do we want to achieve? Equity is a word that is used a lot in this region, but ultimately it comes down to rubber meeting the road, whether we're talking about workforce, whether we're talking about access, whether we're talking about transit. Ultimately, there has to be a means to an end. And so it's really getting clear about the objectives we actually want to see out of this project relative to equity. And then it's measures of success. What do we want to measure and how will we measure it? As we all know, what you measure is what you achieve. And so the way in which we think about how we want to achieve our equity objectives, we have to be really clear about how we're going to measure it and be clear about the data that we may or may not have in order to actually measure it. And so that's sort of the exercise we're undergoing right now. And then finally, all of this is going to matter in various components, one of which is how it informs our community engagement efforts, the way in which we engage our community, the way in which the community engages us, as well as ultimately into our construction packages. How do we actually actualize our equity framework into elements of our construction specifications relative to workforce, relative to DBE participation? So all of these dots are connected from that perspective. So those four parts essentially make up our equity framework. Next slide, please. I want to take a moment to kind of read our definition that the Equity Advisory Group, as well as a subcommittee of the Equity Advisory Group, worked on, and the Equity Advisory Group unanimously approved this definition at our last meeting. And so it says that the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program defines equity in terms of both process and outcomes. Process equity means that the program prioritizes access, influence, and decision-making power for marginalized and underserved communities throughout the program in establishing objectives, design, implementation, and evaluation of success. Outcome equity is a result of successful process equity and is demonstrated by tangible transportation and economic benefits for marginalized and underserved communities. Next slide, please. Marginalized and underserved communities are defined as those who experience and or have experienced discrimination and exclusion based on identities such as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people with disabilities, communities with limited English proficiencies, persons with lower income, houseless individuals and families, immigrants and refugees, young people, and older adults. Together, process equity and outcome equity contribute to addressing the impacts of and removing longstanding injustices experienced by these communities. So that concludes my update. I wanted to leave you with that definition, which I'll just take a note to say is one, I think, that really pushes on the cutting edge of pushing infrastructure efforts to really be mindful, thoughtful, and considerate relative to equity. And it's going to be, I think, all of our charge to live up to this definition and to really operationalize the definition to truly be a lens by which we achieve our equity outcomes. So with that, turning it back over to you, Deb.
And Deb, if I can jump in just real quick, part of equity and part of our framework is looking locally and talking to our local partners about equity, but also looking regionally and nationally for what are some of the best practices in equity. John L. and I just had a very robust conversation with folks from Sound Transit and had some great ideas of some of the things that they are doing. We have a national expert on our team, Tanya Adams, who is looking national for those best practices in equity to help inform and help drive how we look at equity and how the outcomes of equity can be shaped on this program.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So I think we're ready to turn our way over to the discussion time. And I just want to give a resounding thank you for Executive Steering Group for your patience and listening, for your depth of listening. And I also just want to honor the fact that, you know, Greg, you say this a lot, there's these three critical legs of a stool or components of this program. And the Community Advisory Group, the Equity Advisory Group, and this Executive Steering Group are critical pieces of being representative of this region. So we're grateful and appreciative and happy to cross over now to discussion. What I wanted to do is be able to head once around the virtual table, and I just need like 30 more seconds. You've been so patient. Greg, if we could just frame out what we want to accomplish with this piece pretty quickly, because I know we're eager to get into discussion. There's a really quick checklist we did on the next slide. And either if you want to walk through this really fast, if you want me to, whichever way, just so we can open it up on discussion.
So one of the things that we need to hear from you guys is a verification of, okay, the IBR team is taking the right approach. We're not going to have a formal ask, but we do want to hear feedback from you on how we are approaching the changes that we're hearing from our federal partners, and hear your input on things you would like to see us do more of, less of, or do differently. So that's basically the question that we have on the table for you that will drive us towards our May 20th meeting.
Great. Thank you, thank you. And I was just going to do all of this heading once around the virtual table. And if I could start with the cities and just work my way around, if it's all right. I was going to start with City of Vancouver, Mayor McInerney-Ogle, and then go to City of Portland, Commissioner Hardesty. Sorry, I don't know if I had to pick somewhere.
Oh, real nice, Deb. Thank you so very much.
and nobody got any heads up. So
yeah, right. Well, I'm glad we've changed the direction for the May 20th meeting, because we would not be ready to make a decision on the purpose and need as we were thinking that might happen. We do not want the fourth path. That is not desirable for us. We very much want to honor the commitments and the work that has been done for all of these many years. And we think we can move forward with some refinement. We like the idea of refining that process, working with the federal highways and transit, whether you call it an MOU, MOA, IGA, whatever you want to call it, but getting some sort of written agreement so that we know the path. If we're refining, if we're amending this a little bit for a number of different reasons, I'd like to know that we're going down the right road. That if I'm supposed to be turning left and I turned right, that's not honoring the commitments that we have made as we work with the other cities, counties, and jurisdictions. So anything that we can do to stay away from that fourth path, we appreciate it. We don't want to go back. We want to move forward. We think we can get this done, and it's like a Honda Accord. It's a #1 card because they refine it. They don't start all over again and make a whole new model. They refine what's wrong and they move forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Commissioner Hardesty, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much to the IBR team for that very detailed presentation. For me, a couple of things hit. It occurred to me that we were at the height of the Iraq War in 2005. Katrina hit that year. And there were a few other big milestones. I say that to say that a lot has really changed since 2005 through 2011. And I will speak for myself personally. I was not on the city council in 2005 through 2011 and was not a part of the process, even though I followed it intensely as a former legislator. I also would not prefer to go back to the beginning, but I think our community has changed radically, and I do think we're going to ultimately end up between 2 and 3, and I think we should be open to that. And I would hate to think that we would rush to do a project that would not meet the needs of both the communities that have been harmed in the past and for the communities that need to have a multitude of transportation options. And I just want to say that I continue to be concerned that I read about ODOT's new plans in the paper, and I don't actually get information from ODOT. So, I mean, recently I read in the paper about the I-5 expanding the other way on another project around the Rose Quarter. And so it continues to raise concerns for me as a city elected official. I need to be able to hold somebody accountable if the outcomes that we have agreed to are not met. And I don't mean when the project is over. I mean throughout the project. I need to be able to hold people accountable to what we've agreed to. So I would not be able to support something and then trust that there's going to be an accountability built in later. I need to see the accountability before I can support anything. Let me also say that I am very concerned that we have 4 tables who believe they're decision makers. And I'm very grateful that Janelle Bell defined equity, because in my business, I hear equity used an awful lot about things that I know have absolutely nothing to do with equity. And I do think that that is a very necessary step to have a definition that we can all agree to. Because, if we don't do that at the beginning, then there will be no way to hold people accountable for the outcomes. Let me just say that I will stop there. I do think I am happy that we're not being asked to vote on anything today or in May. I do think that we need to continue to build support for the direction that we're moving with clear accountability built in. And so that's where I am.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the information and the comments. If I could go next, I'd like to go to Metro and RTC. President Peterson, go ahead.
Thanks. First of all, I want to say the quote of the week from the person who is running the mass vaccination site at the OCC in the Willamette Week hits home on this. He said, strategy is for amateurs, logistics is for professionals. He's obviously coming out of the military, but he also works for Kaiser Permanente. And so I appreciate the logistics of what we are working on in detail. It is so good to see the level of detail and the clarification that is going on. The more focused we can be both on our climate change as well as our racial equity goals, the more confidence I think people will have going through this process. And I really appreciate that. So that being said, I think I am with Mayor Ann and Commissioner Hardesty on how do we hold the project and ourselves accountable. And obviously on the scenarios, I don't think any of us want to go back and redo the entirety of the process. So the concept 3 of the path, the journey, is much more in line with what I think we'd like to do. But the MOA is like a minimum. And I think that we still need to take some time and have conversations about the other options that have seemingly been taken off the table. And so I appreciate the time that we need to be able to have conversations about not getting to the minimum. So I look forward to having the time to delve in with the project team about working with our delegations, working with our teams regarding making sure that we have a higher level of accountability on this project. So I think I'll just stop there.
From RTC's standpoint, I said this earlier, and Lynn kind of jumped on me earlier, and I didn't mean when I said that we just want it done quickly. That wasn't meant to be a reckless statement. We want it to be done right. So we like to move with all, haste that we can do. Not necessarily haste, but I mean educated haste. I'm not exactly sure what the differences are between 1, 2, and 3. I think maybe that a little bit more information, what would require something just to have a review only versus the rest of it. I'm not sure if I'm quite there. We certainly don't want number 4. It's, we can't be moving backwards. Even if you look at things like equity and environmental stuff. I mean, a freeway that's backed up, freight's not moving, is not good for anybody. And if we went to 4, the cost of that and the delay would just be horrendous. But we certainly do need the parameters from our federal partners on this. I think we're kind of making some decisions, and I'd sure like to know what exactly is going to be required and or how we can work with them to move this thing along, but do it in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hughes. Thank you, President Peterson, both. I'd like to go next, if I could, to CTRAN and TriMet. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I would just echo many of the comments that were made before. We're certainly in a position where we do not want, option 4 is definitely an issue for us. We want to continue to recognize the good work that's being done. And to Chair Hughes's point, we would like to, try to expedite that process in the most responsible manner that we can to continue the great work that's being done. I share the same feelings that Mayor McInerney-Ogle does, really in regards to the thanks that we have for really shifting the mode of the May meeting. I don't think that we are prepared with the correct information that we need from our federal partners to be able to really decide at this point what bucket we may fall into in terms of 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I think that will be extremely helpful. And I also want to take an opportunity to echo Commissioner Hardesty's comments on the work that John L's doing with the equity team. They've just done a fantastic job. Really impressed with the work that John L and that team have done, and to the many points that have been made already. Obviously, equity and environmental are key to the process. And then my final comment would be, I also appreciate the recognition that a lot has changed since 2005, specifically in respect to both transit systems and the different types of modes they use to help support communities, especially here in Clark County. So I appreciate the recognition of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Steve,
Great.
would you go ahead? Yes.
No, great comments from everyone that has preceded me, and I don't think I really have much to add. I do want to thank the project for actually the due diligence on really seeking clarity from our federal partners and understanding how we fit into the 4 paths. I too do not want to return to path 4. And you know, my personal view of it is we're probably in the 2-3 path, but to Mr. Hughes' point, further understanding of what those paths, what the directions are, and the logistics behind each of those paths, as President Peterson had mentioned. So I'm just in support of the team. I appreciate the work, and I think the process is actually working here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. If I could go next to the ports and Port of Vancouver.
Thank you. You know, I just want to echo the comments. I really appreciate the direction that we're going. You know, I'm very grateful to hear that the path 4 is not a preferred option, and that we're looking more in the 2 to 3 path. I know that at the last meeting, I had a specific ask about understanding the federal guidelines a little bit better. And I will say this has been incredibly helpful for me to understand the path and the timelines associated with each of those paths. You know, I would have concern if we were to, you know, look at a path that takes significantly longer, because we do have some serious issues with the bridge that are of concern. But I completely agree. We want to do this right. And I think just understanding the guidelines, the timelines has been very helpful. So thank you very much to the IBR team for all the conversations that I know you've been having for months with our federal partners, and really putting that into a succinct presentation for us, so we can understand what those options are. I think that the other thing I wanted to highlight is I really think the team has done an incredible job of communicating the information to agency partners, staff, as well as with our EAG and CAG and the public. I would encourage the public to go to the website. There is a lot of great information on that website, and please participate in the process, because I think the team has done a great job of trying to get the information out there and providing opportunity for the public to participate. So again, just a little plug for that, to please look at that information and participate. But I think what would be helpful for me is, as we move through this process and we look to future meetings, I think having time to digest the information and have some time to work with our boards and constituents and partner agencies would be very helpful for me. This is a lot of information to digest, so anything we can do to give us some time to be able to provide meaningful input during these meetings. And I think just having a little bit of extra time on the front end would help us be able to provide that for you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And Port of Portland?
Well, this is going to sound quite repetitive from what my colleagues have said. Completely agree on just the deep appreciation for all the work of the team in getting information, working with our federal partners, sharing that information, continuing to move us forward. So thank you to all. We agree that path 4, we hope to avoid, and kind of where we sit in the 2 and 3, I think that will be determined as we move forward, certainly, but we would like to avoid path 4. And the only other thing that I would like to add is just the appreciation for the frameworks that are being created around equity, around climate, and hoping that we continue to move forward with kind of that foundational framework or some kind of document. I don't know what that would look like or what we would call it exactly, that commits us to measurable outcomes in both equity and climate. So thank you very much.
Thank you everyone so much. I'd like to go next to the CAG co-chairs, and then I'll come to ODOT and WSDOT. So Ed. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Yes, I just appreciate everything that I've heard this morning. I know that we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm really impressed that we have a team that are going to bring this whole thing to fruition. So I'm just pleased to be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Good. Lynn?
I would just add that the direction that the executive steering group has spoken to aligns well with the community advisory group. The community advisory group's adopted charter states that the perspective and the insights shared by members of the CAG are intended to influence the IBR program. And again, we're excited to move into the next steps of the program. I would also say that we align well with this group's interest in proceeding with alacrity, but not without qualitative, measurable process in place. And so I would just echo that I appreciate the time to consult with CAG, and we're excited to be a part of influencing the decisions going forward. And just a side note is, again, we understand that our role is to answer those questions that you post to us. And we have a deep desire to have meaningful questions posed to us that we can in fact influence. So we look forward to that opportunity going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of our co-chairs. And if I could then next to WSDOT and then ODOT. Is that all right, Lynn, or did you want to jump in with something? Is that, okay, I'm almost done with the roundup. Thanks for that. So Secretary Millar, go ahead.
Great, thank you. And thanks to everybody here on the ESG for the kind remarks about the team. Chris and I committed at the beginning of this to run a participatory and transparent process. And I'm glad to hear the kind words. And I also want to make sure that all of you know that if you ever feel we're veering off of that straight and narrow path, to give me a call or give Greg a call. I think the team's been doing a great job. The only thing I would add to what has been talked about before is just the complex layers of consensus or consent that we need to achieve for this project to move forward. And we need to have around this table, our partners consent for the solution, the outcome, because this is really about outcomes. We can talk process, we can talk statements, it's about outcomes. We might not get to a place where everybody around the table thinks that where we're going is the best place to go, but we have to get to a place where everybody around this table can live with where we're going. And that, to me, is the most important thing. We have to get to that same place with the tribal nations with which we have government to government relationships. We need to get our state legislators to that same place where there is consent for the path forward. And we need to get our federal partners to that place. But it starts here at this table. And if we are speaking with one voice, or a chorus, not a cacophony, if we are speaking with one voice, we are going to have a much, much better opportunity to achieve that consent at the tribal nation level, at the state level, and at the federal level. I had brief conversations with two friends of mine, one of whom is the acting administrator of the Federal Highway Administration, actually three friends, one of whom is the acting administrator of the Federal Transit Administration, and one of whom is the acting assistant secretary of USDOT for policy. And I brought up to them the importance to Washington State, and I believe to Oregon as well, of measuring everything we do through an equity lens and through a climate lens. And they agree. But it takes a while to turn the ship of state. And with the new administration in place, I think we're going to have a federal partner that is more and more comfortable with what we're talking about here in the region, in Oregon, in Washington. So again, thank you for the kind words, and keep them coming if we're doing the job. If we're not doing the job, let us know so we can get back on the straight and narrow path. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Roger. And to ODOT.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I'll be brief, just quickly echo the remarks and sentiments of Secretary Millar. I heard a lot just during the roundup here, the word appreciation and appreciate. So I wanted to use that one as well. Really just on the kind of commitment to being really creative as this program explores these ways to kind of elevate the values that we have shared around equity and climate. So really want to send that shout out to all of you for bringing your creative thoughts to the table, as well as, thinking about how we thoughtfully move the program forward. So with that, Deb, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you for the depth of comments and the hard listening with each other. I want to open it up. I have a couple hands up, and I do want to add just one tiny process remark. I want to say, because I've heard this embedded in so many of your remarks, that in order to get through these complex layers towards consensus and consent, we have to be willing to disagree openly, and we have to be willing to push each other and push this process. And I want to make sure you all understand that is the best way to do this. I know you know it, but I want to be explicit about it, that robust civil discourse is where we get to the best result. Opening the door to disagree with each other, opening the door to say things that are uncomfortable, that make people wonder, why did that person just say that, is how we get to the resilient outcomes that are going to build this region in a way that leaves a legacy for generations to come. And I'm just inspired by this table. So I just needed to say it, and now we can keep going. All right, so Lynn, your hand was up, and then Joanne, go ahead.
Thank you, Deb. To the point that Lynn raised, and both Roger and Brendan have raised, I want to be clear on intent, that in order to get to that, in order to get to the tension spots before we get into design, we need to get the analysis that we've asked for and you've committed to done. Before we get into a place where we're at 30% design and it's hard to go back. So there's several analyses that that Greg, you've pointed out, need to be done with the traffic flow, with the racial equity, with transit, and I am not willing to go into a design conversation until I know how things have changed and how things compare, in order to get to outcomes that the design will then help with. So I just want to make sure we don't skip a step and start talking next month about design and design options when we haven't even gotten through the analyses. So before we get into design, we've got to deal with the issues that we've all put on the table in terms of accountability, and how do we embed accountability into this process, but also the analyses. So I just want to make sure that we're clear that we're not jumping into design options right away, because there's a lot more to work on.
Thank you for that, Chair Peterson. I just wanted to quickly add, every time I hear the word tolling, I cringe. And I want to reiterate the necessity to change that to congestion pricing. There is no way that you can use tolling and tell me that it doesn't mean that there's going to be toll booths that will be there for the rest of creation. So it is really important to me that people stop telling me that it means the same thing. It does not. It doesn't in any transportation universe that I know of. And I just need to hear from the project managers that they will change their rhetoric to ensure that we're all talking about the same thing. Because if you're talking tolling and I'm talking congestion pricing, we are talking across each other and not having the same conversation. And the last thing is, I want to say I support Chair Peterson. I'm very concerned about looking at or talking about looking at designs without knowing whether or not we are on the right path, and that we are actually going to be looking at designs that will reflect the values that we bring to this table.
Thank you, and thank you. And Mayor McInerney-Ogle, yes?
Thank you, Deb. I agree with President Peterson. I was a little surprised to see that we were designing before the analysis was done. I thought on a previous set of slides, we saw analysis moving quite a ways down the timeline before the design started happening. So I'll go back and take a look at my notes and such. But that analysis needs to happen before we put designs on paper and such. So while I appreciate staff's work on that, let's go back and take a look at that and make sure we're not getting ahead of ourselves.
And Roger, and then Greg, I'll be turning to you after that for any reflections and wrap-ups. Go ahead.
Thank you. I understand the concern people have about the word design, and I want Greg to confirm to me, though, as we do the analysis, there is a certain element of design that has to happen to provide information to analyze. So there may be some design work that's done as a part of vetting alternatives. And if that's why we see design on the calendar that way, that's perhaps more appropriate than we already know what we're going to do, go design it. I'm almost positive that's not what we're doing, but I'll ask Greg to confirm that or prove me wrong.
I'll jump in, Roger, on that. This is Frank Green again, and that's exactly right, Roger. It's a good point of clarification. I'm glad that a few folks have asked. I'm not saying we bring it back up, but when we send out the spreadsheet, or the presentation, you'll see that timeline graphic, that rough target timeline graphic. Throughout the process, you'll see we're collecting, gathering, and obtaining data, traffic information. Making sure we're updating our traffic information to help us influence design options. And Roger, you're right. The word design is in there. But this is really just laying out high-level potential alignments and things like that. And so yes, the modeling will influence what the design options are. We've only really started the initial process of listing some of those design options that we know we have to go lay out some work and gather data. It's an iterative process. And so yes, we hear you loud and clear, President Peterson and Mayor McInerney, and we will be gathering that data and performing that analysis. So thank you for those comments.
Yeah, and just as a confirmation, we're not going to be doing 30% design. We're going to be putting design concepts so we can inform modeling that's going to go forward. We have to have a basis of what we're looking at. So we're not locking ourselves into anything at this point, but we will be working with your staff members to look at data, to run the models, to do all of those things that you guys spoke of. So.
Great. And Greg, I was about to head back to you for a wrap up, but if I could just interject quickly to those of you in the audience listening, if you happen to be over on the YouTube live stream and you want to make public comments, you need to come over to the Zoom webinar and you'll be in the attendees list and you need to raise your hand. And that's how we know people want to provide some public input, which will be coming up next. And it will be brief, but we are very interested if folks would like to provide public input. And then we will be looking to see if our visitors, our guests from the legislatures will be with us. We're kind of watching in the attendee box if we see them, so we can also bring them into the room for that last section. on the update from the legislative process. So Greg, any wrap-ups, comments, thoughts, reflections, please?
So this was a very good meeting to hear and gather the input of where the ESG is at. So thank you so much. We will we'll take these things and come back to you in May and share more of our direction and give you more clarity on where things are at. One thing I wanted to make clear, it's not the IBR team, it's not the DOTs that will determine which pathway we're on. That's a federal decision. They will look at the changes that we propose and tell us which path we are on. So we're going to be very careful to try and communicate with them and communicate what we've heard from ESG is that we want to stay in a public, very public way that pathways 2 and 3 can take us on. Pathway 4, we can do it, but it is not something that we've heard from any of our partners that that's the path they want to traverse. So thank you all for your good and knowledgeable input, and we will take it and continue to ride the rapids in this kayak. So thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Johnson. And Lynn, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess I would just like to clarify, while the project staff can't influence federal outcomes, others of us on this committee can. And so I think that's the conversation we want to have with you.
Understood.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. So we are now at the point where we'll be taking public input, and I have a couple quick introductory slides. We're doing our best to find balance here. As I open up for public input, please, everybody in the audience, remember we have a robust public engagement process concurrent with these meetings. So always feel free to observe at any of these meetings. Go look at the website. There's places to provide your input in a multitude of ways throughout the process. For here today, as I've already said, if you've joined the Zoom here, you can raise your hand to let us know that you want to jump in and provide some comment. If you've joined by phone, you press *9 to raise your hand. I will call on participants. You'll receive an unmute request. Please accept it. If you're commenting by phone, you dial *6 to unmute your phone. As you begin your comment, please provide your name and any affiliation you might have. Attendees are allocated up to 2 minutes each for public comment, and we will have a maximum of 10 minutes. The way we've been handling this at meetings for timing is we do max out at 2 minutes per speaker. I will be using my phone to track. And so at the 2 minute mark, I will have to remute people because we're just trying our best to be fair and equitable with this. So I am getting ready with my stopwatch. And is there a next slide or are we ready to go? Okay, so yes, my comments for after the meeting. Number one, you can fill out a comment form on the program website or email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line. You can call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. Those will be transcribed and posted to the website. All written comment must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each meeting to be distributed to ESG members. So they did receive a packet in advance of this meeting with all comments received previous to this meeting. Other comments after that time frame are distributed to members in advance of the next meeting, and all comments are always posted to the IBR website. So we're ready to go ahead and jump in for our public comment. I do see that I have 6, so I'm going to watch pretty tight and manage with our 2 minutes each. It looks like Robert Liberty, you're first. So we'll go ahead and start.
Thank you. Members of the ESG and Administrator Johnson, I'm Robert Liberty. I was a member of the Metro Council during the time the Columbia River Crossing CRC alternatives were considered and the debate over an adoption of the federal EIS and record of decision. The CRCs, and thus your project's purpose and needs statement, are extremely broad and generic: congestion, transportation choices, seismic safety, and so on. Many alternatives that could have met these generic purposes and needs were eliminated at the earliest stage of the CRC project. Based simply on opinions about them, prior to any modeling or any quantitative analysis to determine whether they could have achieved the same or better benefits with fewer harms, and importantly, at a lower cost. Most remarkably, the role of tolls as demand management or their impact in shifting congestion to I-205 was never integrated into the consideration of the alternatives. And of course, there was no consideration of the legacy of past racism, future equity, and the now significantly worse climate crisis. I believe you would benefit from an in-depth discussion about the alternatives that were eliminated at the start of the CRC process and how and why they were eliminated. That discussion cannot be in the form of a 20-minute roundtable during a regular meeting. You should also draw on the considerable expertise embedded in the region by inviting people to suggest other alternatives that could meet your purpose and needs statement, take you down path 2 and 3, while integrating equity and climate change. I'm confident there are many alternatives that are cheaper, smarter, greener, more equitable, and reduce rather than worsen climate change. Discussing those alternatives now will reduce the risk of another project failure. The risk of project failure is higher and greater and means an even longer delay than the risk of taking another 2 years, if necessary, to develop a better alternative. Thank you for your service.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liberty. Next up is Joe Kunzler.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm disappointed that Roger Moore isn't here, this WSUT secretary, but because I was going to quote him because I appreciate him saying that we need to have a process where we can live with where we're going. That said, I agree with Deb Nudelman, I hope I pronounced your name right, that we need to have the courage to share our views openly. And I appreciate Secretary Millar joining us. I'm deeply concerned that it appears to me, and I hope I'm wrong, this multi-billion-dollar conversation is preordained to have TriMet Max Light Rail on the bridge. I hope I am very mistaken as much as I enjoy and support public transit. I hope I am mistaken because TriMet, unlike Sound Transit and C-Tran, is unsupported and low quality. TriMet, unlike Sound Transit, had voters say no just last November to system expansion. TriMet also has a steel bridge drawbridge problem where when the bridge is raised, all MAX lines are delayed. Finally, we know light rail risk gentrification. None of this is equity in my mind. Then there's a matter of governance and taxation for this light rail. How will Washingtonians be heard on this TriMet board and taxed fairly, especially when Clark County also rejected TriMet's overtures? Key questions unanswerable here, especially on a tight schedule of this project. To me, though, there's an apparent solution. Reward C-Tran for being Transit System of the Year by having C-Tran operate bus rapid transit on grade separated lanes from Vancouver, Washington to a mutually agreeable transit per point in the TriMet system, so provide affordability, local input, quality, and consent. All should stand behind, and it will be a high bridge that everyone can support. That will be efficient and effective. And finally, there is already tolling on transit. It's called a transit fare. I think there needs to be a fare on this, a toll on this bridge to make clear that we need a financial incentive for people to take transit and not drive across the bridge. And with that, I want to conclude with this thought. I appreciate Secretary Millar joining us. I'm a big fan of his. This will be the most expensive project of any Washington State transportation package. It's important to be efficient in time and money. Thank you so much for taking my comments, and I hope I was within 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, well done. Thank you so much, Mr. Kunzler. Appreciate it. Next up is Dave Rowe.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
The 2012 CRC bridge was limited at 125 feet river clearance, and that impacted Thomas Metal Fab. A drawbridge would be a best alternative because it would allow larger river traffic. So that's one of the things I didn't like about the CRC concept. And we're talking now in 2021, minimize climate impact. And Clark PUD has vehicle to grid system, which they're talking about that might implement later on. If we would have commuter rail locomotives with batteries, they could be used to store back energy when they're not being used. And that would improve the electric grid infrastructure. And commuter rail is advantageous to BRT or LRT because commuter rail is faster. the trains now, the Cascades goes from Vancouver to Portland 15 minutes, where light rail is 30 to 35 minutes. So that's points that I'm making. Let's make a less impact on climate using vehicle to grid locomotives, and keep the bridge as a drawbridge. So make one next to it, keep the bridge that's existing for light rail and bicycles and pedestrians instead of tearing down a usable bridge. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Rowe. Really appreciate it. Next up, Sarah Inarone.
Hi, good morning, committee members and project team. My name is Sarah Iannarone. I am the executive director of the Street Trust, and we advocate for multimodal transportation options that prioritize safety, accessibility, equity, and climate justice in the Portland metro region and beyond. I have been attending the CAG, the ESG, the EAG meetings, and even your commuter workshop. And so I do appreciate the commitment to an inclusive process that I've seen demonstrated by the project, and do want to express my appreciation both for the thoroughness and the focus on equity. I do want to ask that this written statement from the feds that Director Johnson has referenced multiple times be made public as quickly as it was received. I think this is a critical piece of information for everyone organizing both at the community level, in the municipalities and beyond, so that we can generate an appropriate response and have meaningful discussions in our community about this clarifying statement. I also want to support my transportation commissioner as a Portland resident, Commissioner Hardesty, when she calls for congestion pricing for demand management. It is critical that this be factored into any modeling that we do so that our project can be right-sized. We need to ensconce through policy language and in practice that implementation of a system-wide equitable pricing strategy that will reduce congestion prior to expanding very expensive infrastructure is going to be something that we need to do not just on this project, but region-wide. As ODOT Director Strickler likes to talk about this elephant all the time, where none of these can be taken in isolation, these projects that we're investing in around our region. And so congestion pricing as a variable in all of our modeling must be included. We cannot think about this based on current demand. We need to base our project design and build on the demand that we want to see in the future so that we meet our equity and climate goals. From there, continue to rely.
Up, please?
Yes, thank you very much. You know where to find us if you want to have a further conversation.
Thank you. And sorry to mispronounce your last name. It comes out of my mouth wrong. Appreciate your being with us. Next up, Joseph Courtwright.
Hi, Joe Courtwright with No More Freeways, and I'd like to address a couple of things. First of all, I think it's now clear that the staff is pushing the very fast action on recycling the existing record of decision and the failed CRC proposal. While they call this the I-5 bridge replacement, that's really an intentionally misleading title. The only part that's really accurate is the number 5. According to the project's own documents, it's 5 miles long. It'll cost about $5 billion, and they'll have to charge $5 for each round trip. It's not a bridge replacement. It's a 5-mile-long, 12-lane freeway that just happens to cross a river. It stretches from Lombard to Mill Plain. The project's own drawings show it'll be 12 lanes wide and even wider on Hayden Island, and will cost, according to their estimates, upwards of $5 billion. And the financial plan they're using, drawn from the original CRC, says they'll have to charge a minimum toll of $2.60 each way, higher at the peak hour, which works out to more than $5 a round trip. So please, if you're talking about this project, characterize it accurately. The other thing I need to say is, I feel like I'm witnessing a trip to a bad car dealership. I hear Mr. Johnson saying basically that he has to go talk to his manager about what kind of deal can be offered. I would say that rather than deal with the representations and just the verbal representations of your staff about what FHWA and DOT require, you engage directly with principals, because your staff has not been accurate about federal requirements. They misleadingly claim to the Oregon and Washington legislators that you would have to repay $140 million if you didn't move ahead with that project. That is literally untrue. So we also know there is a new administration in Washington that accords much greater weight to equity and the environment. They have literally stopped a freeway project in Houston over equity concerns. So rather than deal with the representations of people who are pushing the failed CRC, let's engage directly with the federal government,
please wrap
which
up,
is now
Mr.
much more
Cartwright?
concerned with the issues we care about locally.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for being with us. And our last speaker is Chris Smith. Hi, Chris.
Good morning. Chris Smith with No More Freeways. Secretary Millar spoke about a climate lens a little bit earlier, and I want to point out, sorry, there's a streetcar going by me. I want to point out that President Biden just a few weeks ago committed the U.S. to a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030. The best math I've seen on how the transportation sector can contribute to this is that even with a very rapid electrification of the fleet, we still need a 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled, VMT. So the climate lens I'll be applying to this project as a community member is how it fosters a reduction in VMT, particularly single occupancy vehicle VMT. I also want to talk briefly about climate resilience. The administrator has talked about this as a 100-year planning horizon for this bridge. I wonder if the project has calculated how much higher the Columbia River level will be 100 years from now due to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for being with us. Thank you so much to our audience. Thank you to our speakers. Really appreciate your input, your patience, and your dedication to listening and to speaking and to being with us today. It means a lot to the group and to the program. So we'd like to move on to our final topic. And Administrator Johnson, I'm going to turn this over to you to welcome our legislative representatives. And I think we can take about 8 minutes, and I can use 2 minutes for wrap up with you, if that's all right.
So I know we have a short time window because of commitments from our two guests. So I'll quickly introduce Senator Annette Cleveland from the Washington State Legislature, as well as Representative Sharon.
Susan McLean, I think, yes.
Susan McLean.
Yes, there she is, okay.
To speak to us about how they see the program moving forward. And I apologize, Representative McLean.
Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting us here today. Senator Cleveland has been nice enough to allow me to go first. I have to get back on the floor in a little bit here. First of all, it's been a real pleasure for the last 18, 19 months to be working with Senator Cleveland and the Washington County, here I am from Washington County, Washington State Legislature, and also the Oregon legislature on this project. And this program and Mr. Johnson have done a really good job of letting us know exactly what the different federal responsibilities are that we have, and has done an excellent job making sure that we are continuing to do work that we've asked them to do while we're waiting for the final letter from the federal government with those specifications of everything that we need to do to go forward with this important project. It's really important to note that we have two governors that have signed an agreement that we are both states, Oregon and Washington State, to work together to make sure that we are looking at the modernization, the environmental concerns, and also all of the opportunities that we have with technology and with the changes since the last time we looked at this particular part of our system. And so we have looked at draft functional principles, and the legislative bodies on both sides gave walking orders as far as looking at those principles and adding and basically updating those principles as we go forward in this work. We also recognize that we don't need to start from scratch, but that we do need to update we do need to acknowledge what is different and what is the same. We do need to make sure that we update and improve the work that we've had done before, and we acknowledge, again, what we need for the future and for the changes on many different levels of our system. It's important for us to remember that we are in competition for the infrastructure package that is coming. And so there is some urgency and there is some need to make sure that the region, and I've been working with Metro and Portland and Multnomah County and Clackamas County and Washington County to make sure that we've got all of the JPAC projects and the state significant projects ready to go, which does include this modernization of our Columbia Bridge. And so I would like to end by saying that I really find, first of all, that I want to say thank you. Thank you for serving on one of the 3 advisory committees that we think is so important. I really appreciate all of the public that I just heard testify in front of you and the many different concerns and different areas that they have that they really want us to look at, consider, and be really relevant with how we respond to them and their issues. I do want to say, and this was to a couple of your last speakers in the public hearing, and that is we are very well aware of the differences between 2013 and 2021 and all of the differences that we have in possibilities for combinations of things. I do want you to know that the transit system issue was one of the issues that was left last in the last discussion. And this particular group of combined legislators have agreed that we've asked our staff to continue on with looking at all of the options, looking at all of the possibilities with the commitment that we want to make sure that we have a future for transit and with this facility. And so what that means is we'll look at rapid bus, we will look at train lanes, we will look at a committed project, we will look at all aspects, and we've asked our staff to really come forward with a very complete complement of all the things that could possibly be done either at one time or in staged facility. I also want to just end by saying that it's a high priority for both Washington and Oregon to be able to work together and to be able to come through with funding and to make sure that we've listened to all of our committee partners and all of our community partners, and that we have a successful program by the time we finish with our conversation. So thank you so much, and I want to turn it over to Senator Cleveland.
And thank you, Representative McLean, and it's good to see you and such a pleasure to join you in sharing an update from the Washington side of the river and the Washington legislative summary. I'll start by sharing that I'm Senator Annette Cleveland. I represent the 49th Legislative District, which encompasses Vancouver and parts of Clark County. I have served for the past 9 years on the Senate Transportation Committee. I also serve with Representative McLean and others as co-chair of our bi-state Oregon and Washington Interstate Bridge Replacement Legislative Action Committee. And I'm very pleased to be before you this morning. I see some familiar faces I've had the great opportunity to work with, and others that I don't know. We'll look forward to getting to know you, each one of you, better as we continue forward in this partnership. I probably look a tad bit more relaxed than Representative McLean this morning because the Washington legislative session adjourned Sunday evening. And so I will do my best to give you a very brief synopsis focused on our work around transportation and specifically our continued very strong commitment to an I-5 bridge replacement. As you are all well aware, we began session facing worldwide pandemic, need to address continued wildfire threats, need to address very necessary help for our communities in form of unemployment, housing, childcare, etc. We knew that we had to address those urgent and emergent needs, but alongside that was our continued unwavering commitment to make continued progress on an I-5 bridge replacement and continue to make progress moving forward transportation revenue package for the state. As you know, there are many complicated moving pieces of the puzzle that make up a final transportation revenue package. And for us, some of those pieces include a carbon policy and low carbon fuel standard, as well as the actual projects within the revenue package that are proposed. So I'm very pleased to share with you that we made tremendous progress. We heard the transportation revenue package that's been proposed and includes I-5 bridge replacement in that package in the Senate Transportation Committee this year, and passed that package out of committee. But in the meantime, we knew that we had to first solve some of those other pieces of the puzzle, and that meant a carbon policy. And so very pleased to share with you that we did pass this year a cap and invest bill. Fully a third of the funding that is a part of that cap and invest policy will fund our transportation revenue package. So that's a huge step forward for our state. We also passed low carbon fuel standard, and we acknowledged in both that policy as well as the cap and invest bill that they are both tied to passage of a transportation revenue package ultimately. So our attention now turns in this interim period, now that session's adjourned and we're preparing for next year's session, to continued work on the transportation revenue package. I spoke with the chair of our Senate Transportation Committee, Senator Steve Hobbs, this morning. He is convening a group next week with staff to begin developing a work plan for the interim, and will then continue negotiations around the transportation revenue package with a focus on obtaining agreement between our House and our Senate Transportation Committee members. So that part of that is discussing now levels of spending. Now that we know that we've passed that cap and invest bill, that provides $5.2 billion of the revenue for the actual package. And so that allows us to have more specificity around where we need to focus our negotiations going forward. So I will conclude by saying that we recognize we have these parallel processes that are taking place with the good work that you're doing as executive steering group, with the discussions that are taking place at the federal level around investment in infrastructure, as well as the work that's going on in Oregon, and as well that continues in Washington. But I absolutely agree with Representative McLean. We feel this sense of urgency. That sense of urgency remains. The Washington commitment to an I-5 bridge project is stronger than ever. Our commitment to a revenue package and getting that across the finish line is stronger than ever. I'm very, very grateful to each one of you and for the work of this executive steering committee. Believe me, I know how difficult moving forward, building consensus, and finding a solution is. Grateful to my Oregon colleague, Representative McLean, and all of my colleagues on both Washington and Oregon side who sit on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Legislative Action Committee. We are continuing to meet as well, and our work continues. We want to make sure that we are not left behind as these final infrastructure investment discussions go on at the federal level, as well as within our respective states. So with that, thank you for having me today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Representative McLean and Senator Cleveland. So grateful to have you with us. And I think Administrator Johnson will probably have to save questions if we have them for next time, but we know we'll be inviting you back. We know there's plenty more left to do, and we're so thrilled that we were having you with us today. It meant a lot. Appreciate
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to questions and getting back together. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
As we are at time, we are still in the process of planning our May bi-state legislative meeting. So hopefully we will we'll have some robust participation, and questions that we gather from this group we will take to that meeting and make sure they are asked and answered at the bi-state. So thank you for your time this morning. We tremendously appreciate the support that you've given the team and this the project and the process. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Take care. Stay safe. So we're moving on to our wrap up, and we appreciate that you've been able to stay a few minutes over. We just need about a minute to remind you that we do have a couple next steps. The first most important is that your May meeting is scheduled for a 3-hour meeting, and will be close to your new schedule, but it is Thursday, May 20th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Please note that as of June, you'll begin your new meeting cycle, which will be the third Thursday of every month from 10 to noon. So we really appreciate your help with doing that slight shift in your schedule. I think we calendared you for a number of years out. Your meeting topics for May include more on the program progress and updates. There's going to be a lot going on in that short amount of time till your next meeting. You'll hear more from your community advisory group and the equity advisory group, and we'll still be in a framework of asking you to help provide feedback on the proposed approach to move program work forward, which will in turn be presented by Administrator Johnson and team to the Bi-State Legislative Committee. We will always get you action items and a meeting summary after the meeting. We also post those to the website. And then I think Administrator Johnson, back to you for a quick wrap up.
I just want to say thanks to everybody. We're 6 minutes over time. I want to thank you for your participation and your great comments. We do take everything we hear very seriously, including myself being compared to a used car salesman. So, so thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Please stay safe and healthy. Meeting adjourned. Take care.
Thank you.